So welcome. If you have questions while we're in a section, I'm going to invite you to just hold those to the end of the section, see if I don't answer it along the way. But if I don't, please ask. You've got two workbooks because this has normally been taught over 6 hours on 2 events, and we split it up accordingly. Today, we're going to attempt the impossible and do it all in 1 3-hour session. So within these books, you're going to have all the really important stuff from the slides you're going to see on the screen. And so if you turn, for example, to section 1, there's the slide deck notes and then lines over here. The lines over here are great places to jot down questions, especially if you're thinking of doing a strategy session with us later. And so we're going to be flying through this. I wouldn't bother trying to jot down stuff that's written up here because it's in the book already. Okay? It'll just slow you up. Now, what we have here, this green and black, again, this is a data gathering sheet. If you come for a strategy session, these are some of the pieces of information we would want to see. But this is a great organizer. And so we're going to talk about this in section 4 for about 2 seconds for estate planning. Someday, your children or heirs are going to have to figure out what you have and where. If you didn't do anything but put this down, that's going to give them a roadmap to get started with. Okay, so it kind of helps organize your stuff. The government keeps changing stuff, and so some of the numbers that you'll see on the slide may be different than what's in your book. Because of that, we included a handy-dandy, this is the 2024 official numbers for tax-related things like what's your IRA contribution limits or where the tax bracket's falling, that kind of stuff. And so if a number doesn't look quite right, check here for the official number. We've, let's see, we're going to plow through here. Talked about that. Oh, there's a true-false quiz in there too. We're curious to see if we taught you anything, you heard something you hadn't heard before. And even if there's a true-false question that I didn't get to, but you hadn't heard of it before, then it's true you hadn't heard of it before today. Okay? We're going to, if you have more than, a true answer, I probably suggest that maybe strategy session's worthwhile just to clarify some stuff. We're going to take breaks on about the hour. If you've got your cell phones here, make sure they're silenced. Just for everybody's convenience. And I think that about covers the housekeeping. Restrooms are 2 halls down on the right. If you need to, nobody's going to question it. Okay? So welcome. Glad to have you here. You've met our team, most of us. Elise Azaris happens to be my youngest daughter and the heir apparent of our little family practice. My wife Julie is our office manager, bookkeeper, event planner, receptionist, all things, whatever's needed. My name's Scott Nelson. I've been in this line of work now for about 15 years, specifically on purpose. We're up in Brigham City. That's normally where the strategy sessions take place unless you can convince Julie something else needs to happen. Good luck. But I did say Brigham City, not Boise. I know sometimes people hear B and they think, Boise, that's so far away. It really isn't. A lot of people we talk to go down to Draper and elsewhere to see their folks, and it's a lot faster to come to us. In terms of the class today, we're going to talk about a lot of different things. But we are not selling anything. We won't be talking about any product specifically. This is concept. We're hoping to arm you with as many critical facts as we can get you armed with. Any of you remember the National Lampoon Vacation movie with Chevy Chase way back? So what was the premise of that movie? Do you remember? They wanted to go from the East Coast to Wally World, clear across the country, and they set off with their station wagon on this great adventure to go to Wally World, only to get there and find out what? It's closed. That's a kind of a critical fact, wouldn't you agree? We'd want to know about that. And when would you want to know about that? Before you even left. Let's plan something else then, you know? Why torture ourselves? Sadly, though, in finance, and particularly in retirement, there are so many wives' tales and so much stuff going around. And a lot of people make decisions, oh, hey, yeah, let's go to Wally World, without all the critical facts, oh yeah, that's not going to work for you, right? So the stuff we put out today is for education purposes. We would strongly advise you not to take action without talking to a financial professional about it, just to make sure it actually applies in your case. We are going to talk about Social Security and some of that kind of stuff. I do not work for Social Security, but I can give you better answers than the first two people you'll get on the phone at Social Security. I am a registered investment advisor. That does bring with it a fiduciary standard of care. We have to do what's best for our clients. And our securities business is completely separate. If we start talking about anything with guarantees, that's probably going to be an insurance-related product, and it would be done through an insurance something different. So, okay, I think I covered that. SOFA. How many of you had heard of SOFA before you got the mailer? I hadn't heard of them until they called me and asked me to teach the class. But I'm really intrigued. They've been around for a little over 30 years now, and they're dedicated to improving financial literacy in America one community at a time. I think we can agree that as Americans, we could stand to be more financially literate than we actually are. And so these workshops are absolutely free, no selling. You notice a bunch of recording and stuff goes up, yes, because they want to check and make sure. It's supposed to be experience-led and fact-filled and fun. I can get the first two covered. I'll try for the third, all right? Hopefully we'll boost your morale, although we're going to talk about some stuff today that's a little depressing, so no promises. But hopefully it inspires you to look at your situation and make the best decisions possible for you. So, section 1. Retirement in the 21st century is very different than what our parents experienced. And the fact of the matter is everybody envisions their retirement differently than everyone else. And so to illustrate my point of that, and why do I even bring that up, Zig Ziglar tells a story of an archer, the world's best archer. Man, that guy could pull the bow back and put that arrow dead center of the bullseye. In fact, he'd grab a second one right away and split the first. He was just that good. Didn't miss. But what happens if you take that archer, blindfold him and spin him in circles a dozen times, and then hand him the bow and arrow before ducking out of the way? Is he going to hit that target? There's no chance, is there? Now, in retirement, one of the things is this is a new journey of your life. Now, we talk to a lot of people that are all about what they're retiring from. I've had people come in and tell me how many minutes they have left at the office and how much vacation time they get to use up after that. And they can't wait to be gone, but they haven't really thought about then what. In fact, most people spend more time planning their vacations than their retirement. What we find with that psychologically is you get retired and then you get depressed. And ladies, I'm told by all the ladies that come to my office how hard us husbands are to train and housebreak. There is a serious trend of silver divorce in America. I'm not kidding you. You can look it up. And so I would challenge you to take a little bit of time and decide, what's retirement going to be for you? I had one couple come in and he said, oh, I'm going to golf and hunt and fish. It's going to be great. Now, ladies, what do you think her response was?
Yay, you'll be out of the house.
Oh, yeah? Okay. So kind of think through that. Is it going to be an extended vacation? Are you going to, take on some new challenges you've always wanted to do? I have a cousin that became an author. He had loved to write his whole life, but never really had the time, and he retired. Man, he's put out, 18, 20 books? Some of them are actually pretty good. All right, so without a clear vision, you don't know if you're actually hitting your goal. Take some time to think that through and what it's going to mean. And if you want to have it be a prosperous retirement, put some price tags with those things that you want to be doing in retirement. Make sure that we've budgeted properly. Now, it used to be in our parents' day, it wasn't uncommon for people to work their entire career for the same employer. How many here have done that? Okay, 3. That's about normal these days. Okay, and then they hit retirement age, they get their gold watch and a pension. The paychecks just kept on coming. It was great. Not a lot of planning, not a lot of stress. It was pretty awesome. Okay, then Social Security was just a little bit of gravy on top. Any savings they have was a bonus. That was just supplemental stuff if they felt like it. In fact, I know some people that the day they retired, they were bringing in more per month than when they were working because they got the pension and the Social Security. Nowadays, though, it's more common for us to shift around and work for several different employers over the course of our careers. And then in the 80s, they kind of introduced a new tool called a 401k. I remember going to my first job and hearing about that. It's kind of taken the place of pensions. Pensions have been going away. Some government folks still have those, and bully for you. That's awesome. But for most private pensions, they're disappearing. They've either been frozen or done away with and paid out completely. So retirement then becomes a self-funded proposition. Well, where'd they just shift the risk to? Right? And Social Security isn't covering as much as your lifestyle as you wish it would. And it's not keeping up. Cost of living adjustment's not withstanding. Some people never really retire, so it doesn't really matter. They just love what they do and keep on going. Elise has informed me that I'm going to be working for a long while yet. And that's okay because I love what I do. It's not really a burden. Others, sadly, have to go find something else, and it's not retirement, it's rehirement. And got to keep going to supplement because they didn't plan well. So we want to avoid that. So in summary, it's as important to know what you're retiring to as what you're retiring from. It's really important that you take some time to review those plans, hopefully with a professional somewhere, just to make sure we haven't missed any critical facts. And it's probably going to be a lot different, and there's new changes all the time. Congress keeps passing new rules. We'll talk about a few of those today. So, questions, comments? How am I doing, timekeeper? Good. Okay. She didn't think I could get it done. All right, tax rate risk. One of the big things about the world we live in today is that with the shift from pensions to 401ks, we've basically said, okay, I'm going to not bother worrying about taxation on this right now, I'll do it later. And the challenge is we think that tax rates could actually double later. And we'll give you some reasons why. You've heard a little bit about our national debt, maybe. Anybody know where that is now?
Very large.
I can pull up the U.S. debt clock if you want. We can show you. So that's kind of an issue. And we have a bunch of entitlement programs, and we've talked about some of those, like Social Security and Medicare already. And there are many others. And if that happens, and you have most of your money in tax-deferred vehicles like 401ks, what's that going to do to your cash flow in retirement? And besides that, even if all of that doesn't change, what deductions do you have left? Crickets. Not much. So what we heard our whole lives was, you know what? you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. How many of you have heard that in your life? Yeah? Did you get it in writing? I've been looking. I can't find it. If you could help me out. You'll likely be living on less, they said, in retirement. You know, the kids will be gone, the house will be paid for. So therefore, it makes more sense to defer tax until later. And if the first two things are true, then the third one will be. I'll just argue it's not. And we have evidence. So the truth is, as we talk with people today, and here's, the fact is you're likely to pay more taxes in retirement. Just how it is. Even if rates don't change, your deductions are gone. And if you think about it, you may need as much or more income in retirement than while you're working. Why? Well, think about this one idea. What day of the week do you spend the most money? Saturday? Saturday? I'm hearing Saturday. Guess what? When you retire, every day's Saturday. Yeah, I'll go get this project done. Yeah. Go down to the hardware store. That's the guy's place to shop, right? Oh, I need that tool. Got to do that. Or whatever your hobbies are. So you may need as much. And healthcare would be the second reason. Tax-deferred investments, therefore, should be done carefully and under prescribed circumstances. We want to have some there, and I'll tell you in a little while why, but you only want a certain amount. And you're going to lose all your big deductions. What are your big deductions? Kids? Kids are great. They're a credit and a deduction. Some people figured that out. I've got 2 daughters with 5 kids each. They have figured that one out. Okay, your mortgage should be paid or close on the end of it, so the interest isn't a big deal anyway. Charity. Charity is interesting in retirement too, because while we're working, we're busy. So typically if we're being charitable, we're giving money, right? But in retirement, is that still how we do it, or how do we do it?
Volunteer.
It's time, right? What does the IRS think about your time?
Worthless.
They don't think about it at all. They don't care. So, and then you're no longer donating to your qualified plans either. So it's very probable that you're going to be paying more in taxes in retirement. Anyone, well, I kind of threw it up there too fast, sorry. Want to take a stab at what the highest marginal tax bracket has been in U.S. history? You've got a big hint on the screen.
95%.
94%, yeah. Last 2 years of World War II, the highest federal tax bracket for anybody making over $200,000, we're taxed at 94% federally. Yeah, think about that for a second. Now, when I ask people usually, well, how do you feel about tax rates today? What do you think I hear? Oh, they're so high. But look where they are really compared, it doesn't work, compared to history. We're at a relatively low area right now compared to historical terms. So what could cause taxes to rise? The debt, yeah. Got to fix that. There's only 2 levers to pull, aren't there? Got to get more revenue or cut spending, right? I mean, to balance it out, we either got to tax more or spend less, or both.
Didn't Trump sign something about a low tax rate in 2026 that goes out?
That is true, and we're going to go over that in more detail before we're through. But yes, that's true. So today in America, we've got 10 to 12,000 of us retiring every day. And we do what? We go off payroll, go over to the Social Security office and sign up for Social Security and Medicare. Okay, so Social Security is getting burdened more and more. Last year was the first year that the revenues weren't enough to pay out the benefits. Medicare and Medicaid, big entitlement programs, a lot of expense there. Interest on the national debt, that's scary. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, why would I put those up there? Because if there's an issue, the government's promised to bail them out, right? So that people have mortgage security. We got Defense Department, one of the constitutionally mandated things on the screen. Prescription drug programs, pension obligations. How many of you knew that the government now insures pension plans? Because there have been actually some really funny movies made about pension plan failures. But sad thing. But if a pension fails, the government guarantees to provide 2/3 of the benefits to the pensioners. Where's that money coming from? Just curious. And the list goes on and on. In fact, the 2024 budget is out. You can look this up. I did. Here's what I found. 96% of every tax dollar is projected to go to these 4 items this year. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. So that leaves us 4% towards everything else, which isn't going to cover, and all the rest of it has to be borrowed for all of these other programs in the federal budget. Makes you proud to be an American, doesn't it? All right, any of you know who this gentleman is? David Walker. So he was the Comptroller General of the U.S. during Presidents Bush and Clinton. For 10 years, he did that job, testified before Congress twice a year, got really frustrated with the process and resigned office in 2008 and put out a book called Come Back America. Kind of an interesting read because he actually makes all those numbers a little more understandable. But he had a few things to say about the national debt. He says, regardless of what politicians tell you, any additional accumulations of debt are, absent dramatic reductions in the size and role of government, basically deferred tax increases. Unless we get our fiscal house in order, there's just no other way to handle our ever-mounting debt burdens other than by doubling taxes over time. Okay? Again, scary. Politicians always say, well, let's just tax the rich. The problem is there aren't enough. There aren't enough rich to cover that, and so the burden always falls back to us in the middle class. The poor don't have money, so yeah.
So is it that there aren't enough, or that the rich have loopholes that we don't?
No, they actually did a study, and they said, okay, so the Biden administration, when they were coming into office, their mantra was $400,000 income a year and above makes you rich. What do we need to tax at that level? Because they've got the Congressional Budget Office that runs these numbers all the time. They say, what do we need to tax the rich in order to keep the deficit from growing by more than $1 trillion per year? Anyone want to take a stab at what that tax rate would be for the rich to make that happen?
200%.
No, but it's just as ridiculous. 103. 103%. We have to have all the rich give us all of their income just to keep the debt from getting bigger than $1 trillion more per year. Well, that's never going to happen. Now, do they use the laws to their advantage? I'm sure that they do. I would. I try to all the time. But it's just a math thing. It's just such a small percentage of the population. So there you go. So if Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare go unchanged, what they're suggesting is they raise the lowest tax rate from 10% to 25%, and then the middle rates to 63%, and the top one to 88%. And lest you think that's horrible, here's what the rates are under the current Trump code. This is what's being suggested. Nobody wants to vote on it because that's a career killer for a politician right there. But this is what they were in 1960 to 63. It's not like it hasn't happened before. So there's precedent. And what do we know about history? It tends to if we don't learn from it, doesn't it? So there you go. So could they really double? Well, a lot of other industrialized nations are already double what ours are. So it's there. And we got the debt. So in 2000, everyone was giving George W. Bush its grief because he'd raised the debt to such a high level. But today, We're at 34 trillion and counting. Whoops, back up. And now the interest rates have started to rise on the debt. For a while, we got away with it because the interest rates were 0 point what?
Yeah.
They were way low, right? And so now that they're coming up, it's becoming an issue. It's still not back to historic levels, but it's squeezing things. All right, so as the rates go up, the balloon gets bigger, and we have problems. So in summary, because of the government's unfunded obligations, tax rates will probably go higher. There's precedence for it. You won't have all the deductions you had before, and if you have too much money in tax-deferred type accounts, which we're going to go over in our next section, it could become an issue. Questions? Concerns? Yes?
The Utah legislature voted on not taxing Social Security income for the state of Utah.
I think it's on the agenda, but I haven't heard that it's passed yet. It's one of the criticisms Utah gets a lot, because they do. Okay, there was another hand.
Are Social Security and Medicare funded from a separate tax?
Well, they're supposed to be. Yeah, they're funded through FICA taxes.
Tax rate go up to fund those?
It can, but there's another issue, and we'll get to that before we're through today. The problem is you've got, you know, a lot of people aging out of the workforce, and you don't have as many people replacing them. And so what happens is that's still an obligation. It builds, you know, it's government debt, and so they're borrowing to fix it. But good point. Good point. All right, so planning our retirement distribution, basically in retirement, we're converting all these assets that we've accumulated over our lifetime into paychecks, retirement checks. That's the goal. We're replacing our paycheck. And so if we look at the world through the lens of the IRS, any IRS employees here? There's usually a few. Appreciate your service. We know it's not your fault. When I pick on it, it's not personal, okay? But from the IRS lens, there's three types of accounts. We're going to call them buckets, because you can have a lot of accounts in a bucket or category. So we're going to talk about what those are, how to contribute to those to maximize your cash flow in retirement. We're going to attempt to answer the question that was raised by Stephanie earlier, IRA or Roth IRA, which is better, and how to define a true tax-advantaged investment. You'll forgive me, I've been fighting stupid bronchitis stuff for 2 weeks. I promise I'm not contagious, but man, my voice has just struggled. So I'll just apologize again later. And so when or if should you convert to a Roth? How distributions from IRAs and 401ks affect your Social Security taxation. How many of you knew that Social Security could be taxed? Okay, those of you who didn't raise your hands, I'm really sorry to be the messenger today. Social Security can, in fact, be subject to income tax in retirement. So you need to be aware of that. We're going to talk about how that works and how to reduce or eliminate those taxes during your retirement years. So again, the lie that was told to us forever is you're going to be living on less in retirement, you'll be in a lower tax bracket in retirement, therefore you should defer all these income dollars from your high earning years and their earnings into retirement and then take your chances then, right? So that's what we've been taught. That's what most of us have done. But the fact is you might need as much income in retirement as you did while you were working. Our country's fiscal challenges have another problem all by themselves, not related to yours, but they affect them. You lose all your good deductions, and you might actually be in a higher tax bracket in retirement than you were during your working years, in which case we need to rethink where we have our money, right? So when we're talking about retirement distribution planning, have you ever heard that term before? Okay. So it's basically saying, well, what do I pull from when while I'm retired? How do I make that income stream work? And so it's simply accumulating the right money in the right types of accounts in order to maximize the cash flow you can get from them during your retirement years. So there's 3 types of investment categories, buckets we'll call them. The first is a taxable bucket, tax deferred bucket, and tax advantaged, although that's the official term. I prefer tax free. So to protect against rising taxes, if we believe that tax rates are going up, then there's a mathematically ideal balance to have in each of the first 2 buckets. Okay? So let's identify pros and cons of these, shall we? So the taxable bucket simply means that you're paying tax on the growth of that money in the year it was earned. Okay, how do we know we have a taxable account? 1099, yep, you get that little love note? It says you earned this. What types of things do we find in there? Well, about anything really. Savings accounts, mutual funds, money market stocks, CDs, bonds, etc. So what are the pros of having a taxable type of an account?
The government gets more money.
Very, very patriotic of you, sir. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so you're paying those earnings, but from a personal point of view, what are some pros to those types of accounts?
Flexible.
Taxes are already paid, right?
Yeah, you're not worried about what's that going to do on my tax return if I take money from this account, right? And typically they're liquid, they're accessible, there's not penalties and things like that, generally speaking. So that's awesome. The challenge, as James pointed out, is that it's taxable in this year. So let's say that you've got a 5% CD. Yes, those are out there again, or at least they had been. Are you really getting 5% though? No. You're going to net closer to 3.5 after you pay tax on the earnings. And in retirement, if you have too much money in those types of accounts, those 1099s can cause your Social Security to be taxed. So something to consider. But great for emergency money. So if we think taxes are going up, one of the few things that even Suze Orman and Dave Ramsey will get in on the bandwagon with is you ought to have about 6 months of living expenses in somewhere you can get to. Good emergency fund. Just works out well. If the car, the furnace, the whatever, we've got money. We're good. But if you have too much money there, that's so inefficient tax-wise, and it's typically not keeping up with inflation. So it's just probably the least efficient way to hold money, but there's value in having it for an emergency fund, but beyond that, don't have too much there. But we've had people that were coming into our office for a while, kind of Depression survivor era folks, and gosh, Scott, you know, we've got 9 CDs at 9 different banks for $100,000 a piece, and we think we might be paying too much in taxes. We're just, you know, but it's safe. But you can kind of see the issue. That's an extreme, but you can have a double compounding problem on the taxes as well, because if you had, say, $100,000, and if your combined state and federal rate is 30%, your 5% growth gets eroded to 3.5%. So because of the $1,500 tax bill, you get to pay on the growth for that year. Well, if taxes raise 1% a year over 10 years, while the cumulative percentage is 9% more, your tax bill is almost double because of how that works, right? So not a very efficient place to be. So what's better should we put it in a taxable account or a tax advantage? Think Roth when we say this. Well, if you're putting $6,500 into each account, they both get the same rate of return, and we let that run over time, you have to take taxes out of the growth of the taxable account while the other one doesn't. If we follow the rules, we don't ever have to pay tax. And so over time, not having the tax makes an extremely big difference in what you're able to keep for you. Does that make sense? So, again, one of those considerations, if I'm putting money away, where can I put it? So, what's the ideal balance to have in your taxable bucket?
6 months.
6 months. Perfect. Thank you. So, tax deferred. What types of accounts do we find in the tax deferred bucket? 401ks, IRAs, SEPs, KEOs, SARSEPs, 457, Simples. All of these have slightly different contribution limits, withdrawal age maybe, etc., but the same kind of principle applies. You get a deduction for what you put in. So if you're making $100,000 and you put 10 into your 401k, your taxable income for that year is reduced to 90, correct? And then those grow and defer, but when you take them out, they're taxed as ordinary income. It's not capital gains, it's ordinary income, just like if you'd gotten a check. And you're going to go by the tax brackets accordingly. And the distributions from these can cause your Social Security to be taxed more. There's a penalty if you pull it out before 59 and a half. Generally, I know there's a few exceptions like on 457s and 403Bs. And then at 73, what happens?
RMDs.
You have to take it out, but I don't need it. But you have to take it out.
Take it out and reinvest it if you don't need it.
Do something, but you got to take it out. They got a shot at taxing it, and they're insisting on it. So you have to start taking your RMDs by your RBD. You got to love government programs, right? The acronyms, it's just fun. Okay? So your first RMD has to be done by your required beginning date, which is April 1st following the year that you turn 73. Well, what happens if you don't take it in the year you turn 73? You're putting it off to the very last minute. So what happens in the year that you're 74?
Penalty.
You have to take 2. Okay? So just keep that on your radar. It used to be that the penalty for not taking your RMD was what? Anybody know? 50% of what you should have taken out, plus you have to take it out, plus all of it's taxable. So, I mean, it was mathematically probable that you would end up with less than 25% of the RMD because the rest would go to tax and penalty. But that was quite an onerous penalty, and the fact was that the IRS really didn't enforce it very hard at all. It was there, but it didn't get a lot going. Well, along came Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0. Any of you hear those things ever? They're legislation relating to retirement type stuff. So some of the things they did is they bumped it used to be the RMD age was 70 and a half, then it went to 72, then it went to 73. How many of you here born 1960 or later? So for 1960 and younger people, it's 75.
Oh.
Yeah, so put that in your notes there. But for most folks right now that are retiring, 73 is kind of the number. But if you fail to take it now, they've reduced the penalty to 25% instead of 50, but now they're saying we're coming. This is something we're going to insist on. So I don't want to get sideways with that either.
I'm a little bit confused on which money this is. Is it a 401k? At 73, it has to be.
Emptied?
No, it doesn't have to be emptied. So if you look on the back of your tax reference sheet that we put in, no, I didn't, wrong sheet. We'll get to it in a minute. Oh yeah, there it is. All right. So if you look on the back of this 2024 tax reference guide, it says uniform lifetime table, and they've got numbers on there. Okay. So at 73, you would need to take 3.77% of your beginning year balance from the account as a required minimum distribution. Okay, so
That's probably low then. I mean, if you're living normally, that's coming out.
we'll talk about that in a minute too. Okay, and that grows. By the time you're 100, it's almost 16% if you look there. So they start having you take it out. So that's kind of how that percentage looks on the withdrawal rates from the beginning of the year. Let's see how it goes. So the rule of thumb, because Stephanie wanted a rule of thumb today. Rule of thumb for the tax deferred bucket for how much should I have in there in a rising tax rate environment would be such that, oh wait, wrong rule of thumb, back up. So how much should we put into a 401k? Again, another thing Dave Ramsey actually agrees with, so that's kind of, I don't know if that's good or bad. Contribute to your 401k up to the match, and then evaluate what your options are. But get the free money. For sure, get the free money. And then, given the right balance, tax-deferred assets might be the actual best option. Had a client in the office yesterday, and we were reviewing their stuff. He is of an age where RMDs are a thing. How many of you have heard of QCDs? Qualified Charitable Distributions. So one of the things that you can do with RMDs, if you don't need them, is to donate it directly to the charity from the retirement account, and it doesn't hit your tax return. So it works.
That's interesting that you say that, get the free money then move on, because all these years we've been told, max out your 401, max out your.
You need to put this percent, you need to put this percent, yeah.
I mean, like max it out as in your 30,000 or whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's interesting that your approach here is really different. It's to just get your 5% or 10% and then.
Then let's evaluate. It may still be good, okay? We'll talk more in a minute.
Historically, isn't it what you're talking about, if you do Roth, your 401k should be partly a Roth 401k?
If your employer offers that, there are still some employers that do not. If they do, great, that's awesome. You know, and we'll get to that in just a second. So what you want for rule of thumb for how much to have in the 401k, you want it such that when you're RMD age, that your RMD is less than, because what deductions will you have at that point?
Standard.
Yep, still got a pulse. And you get an extra $1,550 each added to that for being over age 65. So you want your RMD to be less than your standard deduction. If we don't have any other taxable income, and what we pull out is less than the standard deduction, do we owe tax? No, we don't. So that's awesome, right? You got a deduction for putting it in, it grew tax deferred, you're taking it out tax free. Home run. Do that all day, but you can only do that with so much. So something to consider. All right. So if you're 73, there's the standard deduction, 29.2 this year. If you're over age 65, well, if you're 73, you're over age 65, you get an extra $3,100 as a married couple, $1,550 each. So how much money can you have in your IRA so your RMDs are tax-free? Well, you got to take out 3.77%. We showed you that on the sheet. So if your balance is $500,000, your RMD would be 18.8. Is that less than 32.3? Yes, it is. If we don't have any other sources of income to mess with, how are we doing?
Good.
We're okay, right? So having too much, though, then exposes you to way more tax risk down the road when, I don't know, the chickens come home to roost or whatever we want to call it, when that reconciliation has to happen with the government. So what's the ideal balance in your tax deferred bucket? This is a mouthful, but I don't know how else to put it.
You maximize your current benefit and then roll the dice.
You want it so your RMD is less than your standard deduction. That's what I'm trying to get to. Now, tax advantaged. There are some things that masquerade as being tax advantaged, but they aren't really. What kind of tax-free investments can you think of?
Municipal bonds.
Municipal bonds, most common one brought up. We're going to kind of kill that. Oil and gas leases are another. But to be truly tax-free, they have to pass two tests. They have to be completely free of federal, state, and capital gains taxes, and they cannot cause your Social Security to be taxed. So let's examine municipal bonds for a second. Real true tax advantages include all of the Roth anything, and certain properly structured life insurance contracts can qualify. So for municipal bonds, let's say that you had, does anybody ever buy just a bond themselves? I've never met anybody that had their very own bond that they invested in. So it's going to usually be in a municipal bond fund. All right, if the fund manager does some trades and realizes some capital gains in the fund, is that subject to capital gains tax?
Yes.
Yes, it is. What if you, for some reason inside there, had municipal bonds from California?
Taxable.
Can you deduct that in Utah? It's taxable, right? So it's not really tax-free. And the earnings from those will affect your provisional income and cause Social Security to be taxed. So we'll just put those aside for a minute. Besides, they're low yielding and not really my favorite. So let's talk about Roths. Current contribution limit for 2024 is $7,000 per person. If you're over age 50, you get a catch-up of another $1,000 that you can put in there. They do not cause Social Security to be taxed. It doesn't affect anything on your tax return. Your principal's liquid from day one. You can say, oh, whoops, I need that back, and you're okay. So that's kind of nice. But to avoid penalty on the growth, you have to keep that in there until you're 59 and a half or 5 years, whichever's longer. Okay. So if we're doing that for contributory Roth, you also have to meet the income parameters that the IRS has set forth. Who's somebody that makes a lot of money? Could Elon Musk contribute to a Roth IRA? Why? He makes too much money. So on your tax reference sheet, you can find that. Phase out. It's on the right column. The bottom says page 2. There's a phase out there for a married couple filing jointly. That phase out happens from $230,000 to $240,000 a year. For single taxpayers, it's a little different. And so during that phase out, the contribution limit goes down. Question?
Adjusted gross income, right?
Yeah, modified adjusted gross.
Musk's adjusted gross income was below that limit, then he could contribute.
If it were true.
Depends on how he plays his taxes.
Well, you can do a certain amount, but yeah. So with the Roth 401k, there's a much higher contribution limit and a much bigger catch-up provision, and you don't have the phase out. So if your employer offers you the opportunity to do Roth 401k contributions, that can be a really tremendous tool for you. All of your contributions can go into the Roth. Up until Secure Act 2.0, all of the employer matching dollars, however, had to go into the traditional side. They have come out with new rules, but I have not heard of anyone implementing them yet. But the new rule says, so if you hear this from your employer, it's legit, you can ask them to put their match into the Roth, but then they get to give you a 1099 for that amount for the year. Okay? So, for what it's worth. I haven't seen it happen in practice yet. So most of the time we're seeing the match go traditional. So should we go tax deferred or tax advantaged? Well, there's online calculators that try to help you figure that out. We've got software that we use to try to help optimize people's plans. It really boils down to whether you think taxes are going up, staying the same, or going down in your future. So if you think taxes are going to go up in your future, the Roth is the way to go. We don't want to be putting more into traditional. If you think taxes will be lower, then the traditional is the way to go. If you don't think it'll change, it'll be the same for you, it doesn't matter either way. And so we're going to kind of skip this, but this is just an example where our twin brothers making the same money in the same tax bracket, putting the same amount away a year with the same rates of return, who has more money when they retire after tax? The punchline is if tax stays the same, so does their money after tax. But if tax rates go up at all, the Roth is the winner. And it starts becoming quite a margin. So make your decisions accordingly based on what you think is going to happen in the future. So then, a little louder.
Because when if you're past that point, right, where most of your money's tax deferred, right? And, the minimum distribution stuff, I've heard about rolling over,
So conversions are different, right? There's no limits. There's other things. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Some things we can do. So if you're just talking about ongoing contributions, if your employer will match your contributions into a Roth that they have, that would be the way to go, right? If you've been doing traditional and some kind of a split, that's kind of a conflicted strategy. So if you don't believe that your balance in your tax deferred bucket are going to cause your RMDs to be bigger than your standard deduction, go ahead and contribute there. But if not, and I'm suspecting most in this room are well above that level, then the additional contributions should be to a Roth, in my opinion, for most folks. So the trick answer here is everything else should go into the Roth. So there's three basic types of accounts: taxable, tax deferred, tax advantage, aka tax-free. In a rising environment, the ideal amounts mathematically to have in each would be 6 months worth of income in the taxable, a low enough balance so RMDs will be offset by your standard deduction, and everything else into a Roth. Does that seem like sound advice? Okay. All right. And you probably need to use all of those. Okay, where am I at? How far behind am I, Julie?
10 minutes.
Awesome. Estate planning, do it. End of section. So seriously, we're going to be really light here. There are a couple points I want to make, and then we'll just scooch on past. Your books have a lot of good information. Estate planning is simply deciding who gets your stuff when you're gone. If you don't decide, the state already has a plan and goes through probate and you'll figure it out. If you have real estate, I strongly recommend the use of trusts. It just is fabulous. Otherwise, for regular accounts, it's actually best to name beneficiaries. Do not name your trust the beneficiary of your 401k or IRA. Do you want to know why?
Yes.
Go to your tax reference sheet. And we are looking for, on the page 2, left column, second from the bottom section, trusts and estates. You've paid that good money for a trust. You've named it the beneficiary of your 401k. You die. You want your kids really to get it, and your trust says how to divide it up. You paid all that money, but the trust is going to receive that income. At what point does that trust start paying 37% federal tax on your IRA 401k monies? That's kind of a low threshold for that, isn't it? That's why you don't do it. Name people, not a trust. And then people have 10 years to take it out, whereas the trust, it's just got to happen. So there you go. Name beneficiaries. Name beneficiaries trump trusts and everything else. If you put payable on death, COD, etc., do it. The real area of concern that I see in our practice isn't so much who gets it when they're gone, it's who helps manage it when you can't. You're still here, but you lack capacity. So it's worth getting with a good estate planning attorney and drawing up a good power of attorney document for just in case. For married couples, yeah, we've got cards in the back for a young man named Zenick Bishop. Does great work at really good rates. If you're interested, feel free to help yourself. But get a good durable power of attorney. If you're married, you're trusting each other, great. You can now sign for each other for whatever. Off you go. Assuming your marriage is on good grounds, no sweat. If you're looking to kids to have to take care of things, I recommend a springing power of attorney. Simply means a doctor has to sign a note that says you need help before that power of attorney is valid. So they can't just go take your stuff. Most elder abuse happens by people closest to you, and it's sad. So protect yourself. So that's my 2 cents there. Questions? Good. When Zenick comes, he starts telling stories in court and stuff, and they're way interesting, but it takes a lot of time. So probate, in Utah they call it a personal representative as opposed to executor or etc. Trusts are great. Your family gets a step up in basis. For real estate, one other caution I would throw out. If you put one of your children on the deed to your home, for example, and heaven forbid they get into some kind of a nasty car wreck and some personal injury attorney starts chasing assets, guess what's at risk? Your house. Right? Also, even if none of that ever happened, if their name's on there, if you have it in a trust, the value of the home comes out with a step up in basis. In other words, there'll be no capital gains liability. But if you put a child on there, they have to recognize the gain on value of the house from the time their name went on until you passed away and they sell it. So. Healthcare decisions, Utah has a standard form. It's free. You can go to any hospital and get it. It's good to have, really good to have. So review your stuff. Use that worksheet. Organize what you have, what you own, where it is. If there's life-changing events, that's a really good time to do it. Julie and I tend to go over stuff when we travel out of the country. It makes all of our kids nervous. It's kind of fun and entertaining for me. So, anyway. All right. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? Awesome. All right, I've been hinting that Social Security can be taxed all day. So we're going to talk about how that happens and what is provisional income and the thresholds of it and what the real cost of having your Social Security taxed might be. So anybody know what provisional income is? Don't worry, I've talked to CPAs before and they didn't know either. This is simply a formula the IRS uses to decide can they tax your Social Security. So what counts? All earned income. If you're making money and collecting Social Security, your earned income's in there. Distributions from qualified plans, including required minimum distributions, count. 1099s from your taxable buckets, pensions, rental income, interest on municipal bonds, and half of your Social Security. You add all of that up if you're married filing jointly, and it is more than $32,000, then half of your Social Security gets thrown into your adjusted gross income calculation. If it is more than $44,000, 85% goes into your adjusted gross income calculation, and we calculate from there. For single taxpayers, it's 25 and 34, respectively. I have met people who discovered Social Security taxation the first year they filed taxes after they retired. It was not pretty. So, if we have Bob and Mary here, let's say he's got a good pension, his RMDs are $30,000, they've got $30,000 Social Security, then their provisional income will be $115,000, way over the 44. Those thresholds, by the way, have not changed since Ronald Reagan was in office. You might think about writing your Congress people and saying that's an unfair tax on the elderly. Just a suggestion. Everything else adjusts for inflation, but these don't. So, FYI. So if their marginal tax bracket's 22%, Social Security's 30%, then 85% of that, or $25,500, gets thrown in at tax at that top rate. So there's a $5,610 federal tax bill on Social Security for the year. Now, if we weren't really planning on that, we'd spent everything else that came through the household, where are we grabbing the money to pay that tax bill? Probably your IRA, right? Okay, but that's taxable. How much do we have to take out then to cover this tax plus the tax on the money we're taking out to pay the tax? Almost $8,000. Okay, so in doing that, off you go. And if you're in a state like Utah where there's state income tax as well, there you go. So that's the initial cost, but is that the real cost there? It's not, is it? Because that means that those dollars are no longer in the nest egg earning money in the future. Okay, so if we pull that out, based on the opportunity cost of 8% over 20 years, that's $385,000. That's just for the first year of retirement. And what happens with Social Security? It gets a cost of living adjustment. And half of it gets put in the provisional income formula again. And then it gets taxed some more. What we find is if people are having their Social Security taxed, they run out of money 5 to 12 years sooner than if they didn't. So, makes a big difference. So over time, that can be a big problem. Just something to consider. Now, if it stays below those thresholds, it's tax-free. So if you have your income that you're taking out instead of being traditional, have it be Roth or something similar, then those don't count in the provisional income formula and doesn't affect things. You're still enjoying your lifestyle, you just don't have the big tax bill. So the biggest contributor to Social Security tax, too much in your tax deferred bucket, and pensions. How many of you here are eligible for pensions? Okay, so with pensions, we'll see. I would never say don't take it, that'd be kind of dumb. Sometimes, however, there's an opportunity to take the pension as a lump sum benefit roll it into an IRA, and then convert it to Roth. So you haven't lost. It's just another way around it. That's not always true. We have to look at each company's plan because all the rules are different. So if you can't take it as a lump sum and do the conversion, then we just have to do the best we can with what we have. And that's okay. But before electing, it makes sense to just check and see, is that an option? And if so, is the option insulting or is it respectable? Sometimes they'll offer you a lump sum, but it's an insulting number, and we would say don't do it. So in summary, there's 3 basic types of accounts or buckets of money. You can have your retirement in, taxable, tax-deferred, tax-advantaged. If rates are rising, the mathematically ideal balance for each would be 6 months in the taxable, enough that your RMD is below your standard deduction and tax-deferred, and everything else in the tax-advantaged as you can. And that way, hopefully you'll have your money last a lot longer, Social Security won't be taxed, and may not even exist at all. Questions? Yes?
Where do annuities fall in that?
Annuities are an investment vehicle. They could be non-qualified, in which case they'll be tax deferred automatically. If they are an IRA or something similar, then same rule applies. You can, however, I'm glad you brought it up, you can convert money from an IRA into an annuity as a Roth. Now you have tax-free income for life. It's a Roth IRA annuity. Kind of a fun tool for at least some. Yeah, good question. All right, well, let's take a break and come back in about as fast as we can. All right, welcome back. We'll try to knock out the rest of these 3 sections in the next 45 minutes. And did I mention there was a final exam? Yeah, there's a final exam where we'll kind of wrap everything up. Don't worry, no pressure. But if you don't pass, you can't retire, okay? So market losses. All of us are scarred still from 2008, and some of us may still be carrying scars from 2000 through 2002. The COVID shutdown didn't do us any favors either. That's something that emotionally as humans, we tend to hang on to a lot. But there is some real risk in having a market downturn at the wrong time. So we're going to talk about some traditional theories and maybe why we should question them, and how to mitigate some of that risk a little bit. So the thought behind all the Edward Jones stock jockey-ish guys in the world, I love picking on Edward Jones. Some of my best friends in Brigham City work for him. But they say the market will always vindicate itself. And darn it, if you give it enough time, it's true. But if you're retiring, do you have that much time? Buy and hold, therefore, would be an appropriate long-term philosophy. So let's invest. We're not trading, we're investing. We're looking for sound things to put money into. And so if you diversify, you should be okay. That's kind of their philosophy. And Dave Ramsey subscribes to this to a huge degree, and he's picked on by everybody because he's wrong. Now, the fact is, since about 2000, once they got past the whole Y2K issue, right? The markets have been more volatile, and I believe a good part of that has to do with the computerization of the trading. You don't have a bunch of sweaty big guys in a pit yelling orders and stuff anymore. It's all computer algorithms. And most of the trading now is being done by mutual funds and by our retirement portfolio managers, right? And so this volatility has become really an issue. And over the last 15, 16 years, it has, I would argue, gone to the point to where bonds are no longer the uncorrelated assets that they were held out to be because of all the computerization in trading. In fact, 2022 is a classic example where everyone lost money in both bonds and equities. So the buy and hold and diversification and market or asset allocation, I don't know, is necessarily enough to take care of everything that we want to. So most investors in 2008, for example, lost something between 30 and 50% of the value of their retirement portfolio in that particular drawdown. Well, how did that happen if most of those folks were well diversified? That's because the whole system went down, right? So we have to recognize all the risks of being in the market. So there's two types of risks. The one that everybody thinks about is the non-systemic risk. This is where you're investing in a single company. Like when the Bezos divorced, Amazon stock took a hit for a minute. When Steve Jobs first came out with his cancer diagnosis, Apple stock took a hit for a minute. It's not that the company's fundamentals necessarily changed or the industry, but it could have affected how things played there and people traded accordingly. So if we look at Citigroup was on the vanguard of that whole 2008 disaster where they were coming up with these derivatives, packaging up mortgage loans and doing all that cool stuff they thought in 2007. But in less than a year, they went from being the golden-haired child to broke. Kind of a dramatic lesson. Now, if all of your money was invested in Citigroup, you were in big trouble, right? You could, in fact, lose it all. That's unsystemic risk. But if Citigroup holding was simply one of your financial holdings in a well-diversified portfolio, and that was part of the U.S. stocks, and it didn't even need to be all of the 16.97% of that category, but even so, if that was all it was and Citigroup did what it did, it would barely have been a blip on your statement. You wouldn't have seen that much of an impact. So if we diversify, that helps. But is it enough? Well, again, looking back over history, if the entire market or system has a problem, like, a 9/11 event, COVID, we've had things like that happen, haven't we? Where the whole system just locks up. Well, that's not going to help, no matter how much diversification you have. So if we looked at different measures, indices that measure markets like the Russell 2000, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, and the S&P, between those four indices, you've got over 2,600 different companies represented. Would you say that's well diversified? Well, you can't really diversify that much more. They say if you have more than 50 positions, it doesn't really help to add a 51st. But so you're diversified, but you're all in the market, okay? And so if we look at the Russell, there's its performance from 2004 through 2009. There's the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ. Could you tell the difference between those?
Nope.
In fact, let's put them all together. We'll just smush them. If the whole market has heartburn, it doesn't matter where you go in the market, you're going to have heartburn, okay? So what can we do about that? Well, asset allocation alone's not going to do it, so how do we manage the systemic risk? Well, we like to look at life in general. What do we do when we have big risks that we don't really want to carry all by ourselves? We insure it. We insure it. Anybody here ever owned life insurance? Car insurance? Homeowners insurance? Right? We do that. We get a large financial institution, we pay them a premium, and we offload the market risk to them. In fact, if you look at the odds of actually experiencing a loss in any of these categories, this loss in your investments actually carries greater probability of happening than any of the others do. And just, public service announcement, if you don't have disability income insurance and you're still employed, talk to HR and get some. Just 'cause. All right. So we like to call this a principal protection play. So if we have a big loss in the market a la 2008, and your portfolio, say it drew down 40%, if it comes back up 40%, are you back whole? Why? Yeah, you're not working with as much money. You got to have 67% on what's left to get back. And so if we see 8% returns, it's going to take us 6.5 years to get back to where we started after that kind of a drawdown. Okay? Now, we get more clients when their brokers tell them, well, just don't withdraw any money right now. But I'm retired. And then they go looking and they find us. It's fun. So anyway, a way to diversify this, first, have that emergency fund we talked about. If you have the emergency fund, you don't have to pull from your market account while it's down. You have a choice. Okay? Second way to do it is to have a good broad asset allocation within there so you're not all eggs in one basket. We have had class members in the past that we met with, and doggone, but this one guy had all his 401k in his employer company stock, all of it. What could possibly go wrong with that?
It could drop in.
No, it wasn't.
By half.
It wasn't Enron, but same idea. Same idea.
No, I was with NYNEX in Bell Atlantic and
Mm.
Verizon. I was there 20 years. And
Yeah.
when 2000
Be
came,
loyal. Invest in your company.
2000 came, it was roaring, and then all of a sudden, crash.
Mm,
I
I'm
lost
sorry.
half the value of my.
I'm sorry. So sorry. All right, but the other way is to put some money somewhere where it's not going to be affected. Okay, so I'm sorry, I don't see your name badge. I can't pick on you without your name badge. Margaret. Margaret brought up the idea of annuities earlier. So there are several kinds of annuities. You want to be careful and be savvy as you buy them. But fixed indexed annuities are really cool tools, especially if they come with a lifetime income rider. And so what happens with those, so with the emergency fund, you got the money, it's liquid, but it doesn't yield much. Part of your taxable bucket. So asset allocation, the rule of thumb here for how much to have in the market, and the markets, you should have some market exposure because it's going to outpace inflation on average better than anywhere else you can have your funds, okay? So you should have some exposure there. But the rule of thumb is subtract your age from the number 100, and that's the percentage of your portfolio that should have market exposure. So give or take. Now, in the back of book 2, you will find a risk assessment questionnaire that you can take on your own, and it'll kind of give you an idea of what kind of investor are you, how much Maalox do you need to buy when you watch the market news at night, okay? But there's risk capacity, the ability to handle the stress of seeing your balance do this, but then there's risk capacity, how much can you actually afford? And that's more a math problem. So some part of that you don't want in the market could be considered to be put into something like a fixed or fixed indexed annuity where your principal is guaranteed, it's insured. Now, are you going to get 28% returns on those monies? No, you're not. You're going to see it more as a bond return, 3 to 7. Although this week we've been locking in some at 10. So a principal protection program contributes to the overall plan of your retirement portfolio. And again, don't put in more than your age as a percentage, right? You would never want, as a 60-year-old, to have more than 60% there. Something in that neighborhood would work. some of the things that get said. How many of you have heard bad things about annuities? Throw them out. What have you heard?
Very, I mean, well, they're front loaded, they get a large percentage of your money, you gotta leave it into the annuity for a very long time before you can withdraw. And then when you withdraw, if it's qualified, you're gonna pay taxes anyway, so.
Yeah, so you gotta be savvy as you buy it, right? But I would argue that bonds have lost their place as being the safe money allocation spot. They've just become too correlated with all the electronic trading that goes on. We're looking at these as a bond alternative. Can they be set up poorly? Yeah, they sure can. They sure can. But done properly, these can be a fabulous tool.
Can you elaborate on properly a little bit?
I don't really have tons of time, but you want to look at what you want your money to do for you, right? For example, those of you with pensions, you're excited about life, right? You know how much you'll be making per month from that pension forever. As long as you're breathing, this is going to come into the bank. Social Security, similar kind of an idea. How much of your income would you like to have set up that way? You can finish the rest of what you need with an annuity if you choose, okay? You can set it up to fill that gap. Now, if you're putting everything there, that's not good either. They're moderately liquid. They do have early withdrawal penalty periods, but what are we putting it in for? If we're putting it in as an investment and we want to have it behave like our Fidelity account or our Edward Jones account or something, it's not going to do that. It'll be kind of frustrating. But done properly so that it fits with your plan, these can be an invaluable tool, and it I guess never ceases to amaze me how happy people are with them when we're ready to turn on the income stream from it. Because now all of a sudden they see the value of what that's going to do for them. But you got to be careful. Yeah.
I do have an annuity, it's an index annuity with a lifetime ride.
Okay. So it may not be as bad as you think.
Not as good as you think either, because you only get to about the ceiling, but then again, you don't always lose money either.
Yeah, zero's your hero. Yeah. Stephanie?
I don't know how they feel right now, but people like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman at some point in the past said, forget annuities, don't do it.
That's
And
okay. That's okay. They aren't licensed, they aren't regulated, they can say what they wish. Dave Ramsey got in a big firestorm recently. Dave Ramsey tells people you should take out at least 8% of your money a year and it should all be in stocks. Now, how does that? Yeah. Dave Ramsey says your entire portfolio should be a stock portfolio and all equities. And you can take out 8% forever and be fine. Except that every economist that ever has run any kind of models on that will tell you that that's almost always going to fail. We'll go over that next section. But they're financial entertainers. They have to have a one-size-fits-all soundbite answer. Can insurance products be sold improperly? Absolutely. I have to take continuing education just to keep licenses. One of the recent classes I took, it was a 4-hour class, and 2.5 hours of it were when not to sell a variable annuity, when it would be bad. Most of it was, don't do it this way. Why do you think they have that as a required class? Because it's being done, right? So back to the fiduciary standard of care, and careful who you work with, and make sure it feels right, and get second opinions, that kind of.
Is it true that right now those are good time to do annuities because of the interest rates that are higher? I've heard that too. Is that just my
It depends on what you're buying. So there are immediate annuities, which would be like just buying a pension. You're putting money in and payments come out. That's how it is, so it wouldn't matter there. There are fixed annuities, which are like bank CDs. Sometimes they call them MIGAs, multi-year guarantee annuities. They're like a CD. It's going to be an X interest for however long. And so those have been pretty good, but they're coming down because the Fed's rate's coming down, right? Indexed annuities, credit based on market indices or fixed rates or other things, but when we're doing it, using annuities as part of the bond portion, what would be the bond portion traditionally of a portfolio. Okay, it's not everything, but in conjunction with all of the pieces. But they're moderately liquid, guarantees against loss. Rates are typically in the 3 to 7% range over time. They can either be part of tax deferred. If it's non-qualified, it's automatically tax deferred. If it's an IRA, it has to be. If it's a Roth IRA, now it's tax advantaged. So, like Margaret brought up earlier, if you have a Roth IRA and an indexed annuity with a lifetime income benefit, that's tax-free income for life. It's cool. So, two types of investment risks. Unsystematic, which is a single stock. Systematic, where the whole system goes down. You ought to have some risk exposure for inflation protection, but you need to have other sources to draw from so you're not having to sell low. And you want to have some portion of your retirement income guaranteed. Most people feel a lot better and live longer if they do. Make sense? Questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Retirement distribution pitfalls. So things that people do wrong and it's really hard to do over. And well, actually the first two are things you can do something about. The third's just dumb luck. So if you take money out of your retirement account too quickly, we see this fairly often. Suddenly, we have access to an account that we never had access to before. And if you draw down too fast, too early in retirement, it can really mess you up. Liquidating in the wrong order can make a big difference. We'll show you an example. Sequence of returns risk is just kind of how it is. So how many of you have heard of the 4% rule? So William Bengen was a stockbroker, and in the 1990s, suddenly we had personal computers on our desks, and he wanted to have some kind of a rule of thumb that he could hang his hat on to tell people what would a safe withdrawal amount be. And he arrived at 4%, and that kind of got adopted, but very few people really realize what it's made up from, so I want to pull the curtain back on that so you understand a little bit. And so it says don't take more than 4% of your original nest egg amount out per year, and you shouldn't run out of money. And what he did is he ran that over a 30-year period. Now, if you think about that, if you retire at 65, that gets you to 95. That's not shabby, right? Now, if you're retiring at 58 and people in your family live to be 104, you might want to reconsider, okay? So life expectancy, rates of return, what's your asset allocation mix, how old are you when you retire, what will the markets do in the future? Anybody can tell me that? We can have a serious financial discussion after, okay? That would be worth a lot. So the younger you are when you retire, the less you should withdraw, and conversely, the older you are when you retire, the more you should be able to take out safely, because you're likely to be less time on the planet as a retiree. Sorry, I'm trying to keep the whistle wet. So, when do you plan to retire and how long will you live? I need to know both of those answers precisely. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding, just kidding. So in William Bengen's case, he based it on an average rate of return of 8% for stocks and 6.6% for bonds. Anybody here show me some good 6.5% bonds today? They haven't been around for 16 years. They're coming back a little, but I don't think we're going to get there. Okay, so that's not very solid. And because of the volatility and all the prognosticators that I listen to are not really sure. They think 2023 was a bang-up year, and we probably won't see that again for a little while. Just because of the unrest in the world, blah, 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 blah. So, if that's true, 4% may be too aggressive still. William Bangen did this. He started with a 100% bond portfolio because that's guaranteed. If you have a bond and it's paying its payments, doing its thing, hold it to maturity, you know what you're getting. But if you took 4% withdrawal from that, it only had a 35% probability of lasting 30 years. Now, to put that in perspective, if you jumped on an airplane and the pilot said, you know, 1 out of 3 of us landed successfully today, I'm out of there, okay? So then he went to a 75-25 bond portfolio. Now, in light of our rule of 100, that's a little on the aggressive side. But doing that, with those rates of return assumptions, that's where he got at 100%. It made it 30 years in all of his different scenarios. So, okay, let's do that. And if we boost it to 6% on that 100% bond allocation, you're only going to make it 1 time out of 10. That doesn't sound very encouraging to me. And on the 75-25, now it's a 60% chance that you won't run out of money. Now, I'm not sure how you're feeling about that. I kind of like to land on the wheels when I go on my plane trips, right? I want to make it there. So, what do we do about that? And he didn't take into account taxes, what Social Security might do, pensions, part-time work, or order of liquidation. It was just those numbers. So that's just kind of a guide. It's not anything to hang your hat on. And then you got Dave Ramsey saying, just take 8%. 100% stock portfolio, 8%. Go for it. You should be fine. Mile wide, half-inch deep. All right, so the order in which you spend down your assets in retirement makes a difference. So again, if we look at our buckets, the taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-advantaged, software will help you determine what are good allocations to have there for you, for what you want to do. And you'll see we're kind of weird. We ask you, well, what's your lifestyle? What do you expect your lifestyle to cost you a year? Ballpark. Christmas, trips, whatever, give us a number. We're not auditing you. We just want to use a good number that's going to work. Most places just say, well, this is going to give you this much income per year, and off you go, right? But if you look at it and say, well, no, because every day's Saturday, and we want these bucket list things to get checked off, here's kind of how we need our money to work. Will it? And those are kind of questions we like to solve. So if we look at John and Sally here for a minute, we're going to look at what they've got. Now, this doesn't have to say anything about your portfolio. We just made up numbers and threw them up here. So you can add zeros, take away zeros, whatever you want, doesn't matter. The idea here is that they've got some non-qualified mutual funds, some cash in the bank, some IRAs, some Roth IRAs, some stocks, and some non-qualified annuities. So they've got Social Security. We're going to give Social Security a 3% cost of living adjustment each year. And we're going to say their lifestyle is $80,000 a year after tax, that they have a 25% effective tax rate, and throw some inflation at it. And so if they just pull the money, however, what we most often see happen is because nobody wants to meet IRMA, because they don't want to pay more tax than they have to, they end up liquidating the Roth accounts first and then working on it from there. And so in a random order of liquidation, these guys did that too. And cash, it just kind of sits there. So after years of retirement, they have spent $4.3 million on their lifestyle. That sounds okay, right? They had growth on their assets and they drew it down. The problem is they run out of money at age 93. Now, if you tip over dead at 91, who cares? Okay, but if you live to be 94, this is a problem. We're going to have to find a belt and tighten it. It's going to be uncomfortable. On the other hand, not changing anything except the order of liquidation. Which account are we pulling from first? Using our software to determine what that should be, we pulled the non-qualified monies first, other than the annuity, and we only took RMDs from the IRA along the way, starting Roth later. They ended up getting more than $1 million more for themselves through their retirement years for their lifestyle with just that one change. So, takeaway, they're running out of money at age 100, but that's a lot better than 93, right? So it pays to get with somebody that has processes and checklists and formulas and knows the critical facts and stuff to see that your plan is sound and solid. So, which would you rather have? 7 more years if I don't have to adjust my lifestyle at all and everything's roses and lollipops? Sounds pretty good. So over $1 million difference just in that. Sequence of returns. I was in a class last week in Arizona and they just called this the dumb luck risk. Do you know what the market's going to do in the future? I mean, if anybody really did, they'd really have a lock, wouldn't they? So if you happen to be unlucky enough to retire during a few years of negativity in the market, that could do lasting damage to your portfolio. We've got 2 couples here that retire at the same age, with the same amount of money, with the same lifestyle, and their portfolio gets the same average net return over the same period of time. But because Tom and Mary had negative market years in the early going, they ended up running out of money way sooner. Meanwhile, Mike and Susan not only didn't run out of money, they actually have more money at the end than they did at the beginning, while still spending the same amount. So, again, broken crystal ball, but a potential solution is to have some money for your lifestyle in somewhere that's guaranteed not to lose. And to have some in an emergency fund where you can draw it and not take it out low. That way you avoid the risk of taking negative returns during withdrawal periods, and allows you to benefit from periods of higher returns along the way. So don't take out too much too soon, or at least have gone over it with some professional somewhere to give you a second opinion that's non-biased. That, yep, we can afford that. Try not to take more than 4% a year, give or take. Make sure you're doing it in the right order. Software helps with that. And have some ways to reduce your market risk to avoid sequence of returns risk. Clear as mud?
Question
Yes,
regarding
Jen.
sequence of returns.
Mm-hmm.
Did that second scenario consider a rising income tax environment, or?
That kept tax neutral. We're just looking at sequence. We're trying to isolate a particular risk. In fact, if we look at this chart, come on, Mike and Susan. There you go. You notice the ending number here is the starting number here. That's why the average rate of return's the same. It's just a different order. Okay? And we've got software that'll actually do that randomization. Take whatever, plug it in, and what ifs, kind of stress test the plan. Yes?
You talk about computer software. Are there programs that the common folks like us could be using, or would you recommend that or is the computer software primarily for investment advisors to help us?
There's stuff out there online. There's online calculators, but I don't know that they'll get to the level of sophistication that you would need for that.
So that wouldn't be
But
available to us, it would be local.
I don't know that they require you to have a license to buy it, but I think the software packages start around $2,000, go up. Ours, because of all the stuff that changes all the time, we're on a monthly subscription kind of thing, so everything stays current. But that lab session is free. You're welcome to come in. No obligation. It's just talking. Just talking. Is there something that's fallen through a crack somewhere that we'd like to close? We hate hearing sad stories after it's too late to do something about it. So if we can get ahead of it, it makes us feel better. All right, so here's a depressing section. Long-term care. Any of you ever have to take care of a loved one? Yeah, it'll happen. Yeah, it'll happen. So long-term care planning. Now in this section, I'm not talking about buying insurance necessarily, but you should have a plan for if something happens and you need care. Whatever the strategy is, and your loved ones need to be in on it. Saying I'm going to drive myself to the mountains after the stroke happens might not be a good solid plan, right? So we're going to talk about how it could affect your retirement. We're going to talk about Medicaid and their rules, some common alternatives for paying for long-term care, and some recent innovations that have made it better. So how many of you think Medicare will pay for long-term care? Good. They will pay for rehab. So if you get your new ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, whatever, and you need rehab to go get stronger to safely return home, Medicare will pay for up to 100 days in a skilled nursing facility for you to get stronger and better. But the second the doctor on his report each week says, no, this is as good as it's getting, Medicare stops paying. So it's not Medicare will pay for 100 days, they will pay for up to 100 days. Subtle difference, but it matters. All right, assets. We could just give our stuff away and then apply for Medicaid and that'll take care of it. What do you think? How come? What's wrong with that? Taxes could be an issue, yeah. But even worse, Medicaid looks back 5 years. Yeah. My kids will take care of me. Do they know that? Have they agreed? Okay, that's all well and good, but let's make sure. Most long-term care, when we say long-term care, what comes to your mind? Yeah, some facility somewhere, right? Most long-term care is actually done at home by family. Do you know what the most common result of caring for a chronically ill individual is? More chronically ill individuals, usually back injuries. Okay? So, got to be prepared. I'm okay with my kids supervising my care. It's not going to happen to me. And some people think we either have to pay for it ourselves, rely on family, or buy expensive long-term care policies. Any of you here own long-term care policies? Okay, there you go. So, long-term care policies have been around for a while. They've gone through quite the evolution. Now, should the care get to the point where we have to go into a facility, here's your national cost. In Utah, kind of on the lower fringe of that average for skilled nursing facility care. 70% of retirees are going to need some kind of care before we check out. That does not mean facility, but it does mean maybe there needs to be a ramp, maybe there needs to be a lift chair, maybe there needs to be some home health, okay? Medicare does not pay for it. Medicaid won't pay for it until you're broke as they define broke, and we will define that for you in a second. Medicaid has a look back of 60 months. So if you see that Alzheimer's symptoms coming on and we're going to give stuff away, right? Maybe. maybe, but if it's a sudden stroke or something like that, how do you plan for that, right? And if you give it away, then there's issues there too. Long-term care expenses, if we haven't planned properly, can destroy a lifetime of savings and legacy that you would have hoped to pass on to the next generation, maybe. Children are not always able to provide that long-term care, either through their personal circumstance or just resources. They've got jobs, etc. We had the opportunity to try to care for my parents for about a month. 2 chronically ill individuals. They were great as long as Dad could take care of Mom, but when Dad couldn't take care of Dad either, then we were suddenly in trouble, and we had a staff of 4. We were all working full time, and we lasted about a month. So sometimes it's just a challenge. And long-term care insurance does get expensive. We have people come in with policies frequently where I say, oh my gosh, these premiums now are so much money. What should we do? Should we keep it? Should we not? And, we'll evaluate it with them. Most cases, we're going to say, well, hang on to it. And there's one case where the client's still on claim with their policy, and they were this close to letting it go, and then it became a real benefit to him. So we found other ways to make it work. So Medicaid has spend down rules. Have you ever heard having to spend down? Medicaid spend down. So Medicaid applications have 2 steps. The first is, are you eligible, which is to say, are you broke as we define it? And then the next step in the equation is, what is your share of the cost going to be? And so for the patient themselves, that's a fairly easy equation. You can have $2,000 between changing the couch cushion, checking savings, whatever. All of your accounts added together, $2,000. You can have up to $1,500 in cash value in life insurance, a home, a car, personal effects, final expenses. Now, the community spouse, though, we've seen people that knew about the first rule but not the second. The community spouse is the healthy spouse that doesn't need to go in for the care. They're still trying to maintain the house and do what they can amongst all this chaos. The community spouse are allowed to keep some assets, and that there's a range and there's a formula, but it can be between $30,000 and $150,000. Depends on the state, depends on circumstances, depends on whose names are on the accounts. And the house, the car, funeral plans. Then the income part, if you're just looking at the patient, that's easy. Your share of cost is all the money you have come in each month, pension, Social Security, etc. In Utah, we subtract a $40 a month haircut and pajama allowance, I call it. And the rest is your share of costs that you pay, and then Medicaid picks up the rest, right? Now, if you're married, your spouse is entitled to monthly maintenance. And so the figure there is approximately $2,500. Part of that has to do with whose name's on which check. And so we can help you through if that becomes an issue, but just something to be aware of. So traditionally, people say, well, we'll just have to pay for it ourselves. And if you're one of those fortunate ones like my dad, he was in the nursing home for, I think, 7 weeks. Okay, that's not going to end the world in my view. We can do that for that period of time. But what if it becomes 3 years? Well, that's a lot bigger bill, isn't it? So you can ask family members to take care of you. So be nice to them, I guess. Elise has been kind enough to say, I'll take care of you. We keep paying her too. And then, or you get traditional long-term care insurance, but another way that has become more popular recently is using indexed universal life insurance. So, life insurance companies know that when we get to a certain age, Any of you here feel like you really need life insurance per se for the death benefit? Don't see anybody raising their hands. Well, they know that, but they'd like to have your money longer. And so they came out with a brilliant idea, I think, which is living benefits. Okay, what? You get to have part of your death benefit while you're alive. And so we'll show you how that might work. So paying for it for yourself will let you use that idea, but let's compare long-term care with life insurance for a second. Long-term care is actually getting to be really difficult to obtain because they underwrite based on morbidity. So if you've got that bum knee, that bad back, you've got that history of Alzheimer's, early onset in the family, something like that, they're just going to say no, or they're going to charge a whole lot more money. It's harder to get. And as we get older, I mean, I'm sure none of you have ever had any mishaps in your life where you've broken something or been laid up or you've got that whatever. So it's one of those challenges. And so to go on claim, what they say is you have to be unable to perform 2 or more activities of daily living, which they define as these: eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring, meaning getting yourself from A to B, and incontinence. That's reminded me of a Depends joke I'm going to skip. So premiums are not guaranteed. They do go up over time, and coverage is usually use it or lose it, kind of like your car insurance. So if you have car insurance and you never have a wreck, how much premium are they giving back to you? Okay? And the claim process is a reimbursement process. In other words, you pay first, turn in the forms for each thing, and then we'll consider each time. So it's a little bit cumbersome for a minute until you finally get the nursing home staff trained to just do it for you, which they do eventually. Now, if we contrast that with life insurance, it's based on mortality. We actually had a client that got like a, what they call it, super preferred non-tobacco rating. Guy can barely walk. Now, when we're talking about long-term care, and he's coming into the office and he uses 2 canes, and he can't sit straight in his chair, but he has coverage now this way instead. And so what they say is, we're going to do this based on mortality. So none of those joint issues become part of the underwriting. The premiums, sometimes you just pay it off in once. Here, I'm just going to put this there, set aside, and it's done, or you can have them set and guaranteed for life. And if you die never having used it, unlike long-term care where it's just forfeit, there's still a death benefit going tax-free to your heirs. And the benefits are an indemnity benefit, and we've got a couple clients actually on claim. And so what they say is, okay, the doctor signs a note that says that you need help with. When they come in the office in a wheelchair with that note, it's pretty obvious they qualify. We turn that in, and the death benefit is advanced 2% per month. And it just comes, mailbox money. Do with it what you want to. So in their case, they bought a handicap van, they got a lift in the garage, they put in some handrails. He hires some ladies to come in once a week to give him a day off because she's not only in the wheelchair, but she's got some dementia, but she can still dial the phone number on the infomercial. So, day off once in a while is kind of nice, right? So if you had a $400,000 death benefit, there's $100,000 a year just because, okay? So long-term care is a thing. You ought to have a plan. Medicaid's not going to pick it up until you're broke. Medicare won't. Let's at least have a plan to make sure everybody's okay and gets through that all right, because it will interrupt your life. So you can either self-insure, rely on family, get long-term care, or consider a life insurance policy. Questions? Okay, so take a minute. I need to change slide deck. 5-minute break. We'll come back in at 10 after. give you your final exam and answer whatever questions. Alrighty, so let's get going and sum up what we've talked about, and we'll use a couple of case studies and whatever, but I'm just going to ask you questions, and if you know the answer, don't stand on ceremony and raise your hand or nothing. Just shout out the answer if you think you got it, all right? So if we talk about U.S. tax history, what was the highest marginal tax bracket in U.S. history? 94%. And do you remember when that was? Yep, last 2 years of World War II, 94%. This was for people that made over $200,000 a year. So in today's dollars, that'd be like $3 million or something a year, right? I mean, what kind of people would that have affected then that you can think of? Rockefellers, Carnegies, okay. There was this one actor, though. Anybody know? Who turned politician. He wrote in his autobiography that that's how he got into politics. Why? Because he made about $100,000 per movie. And so he'd be done with 2 movies by June, and it literally didn't pay him to do any more work for the rest of the year. Why?
Because it's all known taxes.
Yeah, 94% is going to the government. Well, got ahead of myself. Where'd the other 6% go?
The state.
State of California. It literally did not pay him anything to make any more money after that level. So it kind of inspired some stuff. All right. What's the highest marginal tax bracket of the 70s? We all remember the 70s, don't we? We weren't necessarily paying attention to tax, but we remember the 70s. This one's easy. There was a disco ball and a 70% top marginal tax rate, again, for everyone making $200,000 a year or more. Well, this is starting to get to be maybe a little more real then, still. It's up there. What is the highest marginal tax bracket today?
40.
I hear 40. 37. It's actually 37. It's actually 37. So 37% today. And that is going to be for people, if you look at your handy dandy cheat sheet, married filing jointly, making $731,000 or more per year. Okay? So not really a big deal for most people. What's going to happen to that in 2026? 2.
42?
No.
44?
It's actually going to 39.6. Now, does that cause me a lot of heartburn? No, not really. That was the top marginal tax bracket for the entire decade of the 90s. How did the markets do in the 90s? Man, they were great. You could have put $100,000 in the market in 1990 and gone to sleep, and 10 years later woke up with $600,000. Your money would have sextupled during that period of time. Is this an economic killer? No, I don't think so. Want to be smart about it, but there you go. But what happens beyond 2026? Any guesses? Up? Up? For those of you who say they're going to go up, why? What's the government going to be spending money on?
Debt service.
The debt. Yeah, the entitlement programs such as
Medicare, Social Security.
Yep, all those things. The CARES Act, when COVID broke out and they did the CARES Act, that blew a $6 trillion hole through stuff. And the government just printed it. I think they did way more than they should have. Easy to be the armchair quarterback, I know, but just money sloshing around everywhere. Pension guarantees, defense, I mean, there's plenty to be spent on, right? Okay, so which of those are probably the 2 biggest problems? Medicare and Social Security, thank you. So let's tackle Social Security first for a second. We had a question about this earlier, so I'm going to fulfill my promise. Who can tell me when Social Security was first established? We hear 30, we hear 40. Let's split the difference and call it 35. Okay, this was the linchpin of Roosevelt's New Deal package, right? And when it was first set up, how many workers were paying into the system for each recipient? I hear 20, 10. How about 42? 42 paying in for each recipient. And how old did you have to be to start getting benefits back then?
65.
65, that's right, not 62, 65. And so when you started getting benefits, that was awesome. What was life expectancy in the U.S. in 1935?
75.
I hear a 70, 65, 62. They didn't even expect half of Americans to get old enough to go on claim. Okay? This was a social safety net. Basically, the premise before, we told you things have changed. The premise before was work till you're dead, right? Or until you can't. But if you do get to 65, we got the Social Security program, right? We'll kind of make sure you don't starve. All right. Now, if you made it to 65 and went on claim, on average, how long did you get benefits?
A year.
I hear 1 year. I hear 5. Is actually 2. You're about right at 2. All right. Well, let's look at the population history of America over the last century or so. So we had the Henry Ford generation. There's still a few of those hanging around. Tom Brokaw renamed them the Greatest Generation. The World War II vets, Great Depression survivors, and they were followed by more Great Depression survivors that went into Korea, called those the Silent Generation. And those two groups came home from war and started doing something at a rate that had never been done before, which was having kids. Thank you for putting that so delicately. So anyway, so that created then the baby boomer generation. I'm a baby boomer. Many of you may be. That went till 1964 when we got the Generation X crowd. Okay. Friend of mine's a Gen Xer. Did the baby boomers have as many kids as their parents?
No.
Didn't. Generation X started having more. A friend of mine has 7 kids. He lays up at night and asks himself, why? Okay. So that's kind of the cohorts. Now, as we look at that as it relates to benefits, do you see any issues here? Not as many workers following up, right? Okay, now if you think about it, a lot of people have made a lot of money on the baby boom generation just because of our sheer size. Lee Iacocca did it twice. First with the Mustang and next with the minivan. Okay? Disposable diapers. We've changed everything as we've gone through stuff, and that continues to be true today. But as we look at Social Security, how's that playing out? How many workers pay in today for each recipient?
2 to 1.
I hear 2 to 1. We're almost there, not quite. 3 to 1 right now, 2.9 technically, but within 10 years, it's expected to be 2 to 1. Do you see a problem with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now today, how old do you have to be to claim?
62.
62. And if you go on claim at 62, how long will you likely be getting benefits?
25 years.
About 25 years? Yeah, right close, 23-ish, they say. Now, some people have paused me here and said, now, Scott, just a minute. Life expectancy in the U.S. is about 78. How do you explain that? Well, easy. If you get old enough to get Social Security, you've already gone past the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, teenage driving stupidity and stuff, right? So at 62, you're expected to live to about 85, okay? So is there kind of a math problem with that? Kind of so, right? You know, remember David Walker, CPA of the USA for 10 years? he said a few things that are pertinent. He said, if you think Social Security's bad, he said, entitlement programs are physical cancer. Medicare's 5 times worse than Social Security is. Now, the government's doing things in their defense. They're trying to take small measures and get there. But in order to keep these promises, David Walker says taxes have to double. And with no change in the tax rates, the national debt's going to grow by $2 trillion a year. And if you look in this year's budget forecast, that's almost exactly what they're forecasting it to grow by until it hits 53 trillion. Why stop at 53? Because at 53 trillion, it would consume all tax revenue just to pay the interest on the debt. There's no money left for anything else unless something changes. Well, after getting frustrated testifying before Congress twice a year, not getting anywhere, he resigned, wrote a book, Come Back America, and went out on the book tour as authors do. And he was on an NPS program telling the hostess that taxes have to double. And she was arguing with him saying, no, that can't be. He says, I can explain why in one 4-letter word. And she couldn't guess it. And so they opened the phone lines. And we've done that here. Anybody want to take a guess? Debt. That's a good guess. Work. Okay. One guy in class said health. He says, no, it's math. It's math. He says, it's math. A friend of mine was doing one of these classes in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, just before the midterm elections. He says, afterwards, he was just swarmed with people saying, who should I vote for? Who should I vote for? He says, I've never felt more powerful in my life. But he says, it doesn't matter. Whoever is in office, they inherit the same math problem, and they only have the same levers to work with. Tax more, spend less. There's only 2 things that can be done. Now, how many of you in here watch cartoons? I can tell a couple of you do. All right. Any of you, y'all remember the Roadrunner, right? We were like weaned on the Roadrunner. So the Roadrunner's always chasing around the desert, and he's always being pursued by his arch nemesis, Wile E. Coyote, super genius, right? And there's one episode that reminds me a lot about the circumstance we find ourselves in as Americans. In this episode, Wile E. Coyote is just so focused on his work building his bomb he just got from Acme. In the shed that he got from Acme, that he doesn't notice that the Roadrunner has pushed the shed up to the center of the railroad tracks until the screws start vibrating on the bench from the oncoming train, right? Now, if you found yourself on the railroad track and an oncoming train approaching, what would you do?
Try to stop the train.
See Julie after class. Well, so the Roadrunner, you know, he reaches over and pulls down the blind on the window, right? And does he ever really get killed? It's so frustrating. Anyway, but in a very real sense, we're on the train tracks, and we have a train approaching in the form of higher taxes. Higher taxes. It has to happen. There's actually a story I found from several years ago, but it's so old now that I don't know about bringing it up. There's a guy here at Far West, the front runner came along, and he was in his Nissan Sentra, and he noticed the front runner coming behind him, and he got his wheel stuck in the tracks trying to do a U-turn. But he said when he saw the train, he got out of the car and got off the tracks, right? Okay. So as we look at it in a macro view, the taxes are coming. As a country, something's going to happen, and that's bigger than I can solve. But in a micro sense, can't we get ourselves off the track? And if we can, We want to do that, don't we? Okay. So as we talk about stuff and we look at the world from the IRS lens, we've got the taxable bucket. What kind of things do we find in the taxable bucket?
Money market, CDs.
Yeah, savings, CDs, money market, liquid things, right? And how much money do we want to have there?
6 months.
6 months. Okay. You know you have one of these if they send you a 1099 and you didn't take a withdrawal, right? You earned money, but and they want that done. So those earnings are taxable in the year they're earned. Very liquid, makes a great emergency fund, great tool. You should have some. Up to that amount, because beyond that, it's inefficient. It's just not worth it past there. Next, we have tax deferred. What do we find in our tax deferred buckets? IRAs, 401ks. Yeah, all those fun tax code references that they mention. Annuities, by default, fall there. So these have various contribution limits and so forth, but they have several things in common. What you put in is deductible in the year of your contribution, which takes it off the tax table for that year and postpones it. And when you take it out, it's then taxed as ordinary income, okay? So finally, we have our tax-free bucket. And remember, to be truly tax-free, it has to meet several criteria. There are some fakers or partial ones, but it has to be free from federal tax, has to be free from state income tax, it has to be free from capital gains tax, and it cannot cause Social Security to be taxed. Municipal bonds only fill one of those boxes, okay? And they're really low yielding, so use caution. There may be cases if you're already in the 37% bracket or some such thing, and you just feel like being civic-minded, but not necessarily ideal for most of us. So because they're dividends and capital gains and so forth, affect us and affect Social Security, not completely, truly tax-free. So let's look at a case study. So we want to take what we've learned and apply it to the Joneses, okay? So the Joneses are 50 years of age, make about $100,000 a year. And so I've been around the block a few times, and I appreciate those of you who came and asked me about, well, what kind of practice do you have and how does it work? Because I've seen all of them. I've been recruited to all of them, been to trainings. There's pretty disgusting things that take place. But if they came into the typical brokerage office and sat down with somebody and said, well, here's what we've got. We've got $500,000 between our IRAs, got $100,000 non-qualified mutual funds. There's a 401k at work. We're putting 10% in, but the employer doesn't match because they're cheapskates. We've got some life insurance. It's term life, like Dave Ramsey said too, for $2,000 a year. Some long-term care insurance for $4,000 a year. What typically happens in that conversation, it's just almost comical to me when I've watched it so much, but tell me if it sounds true. Usually they'll get congratulated. Oh, you've done so well. Look how you've done. That's awesome. So your IRA, you're getting about 7%. Well, if you came over to us, we think we could get you 8%. Get you a little bit better return on that. Those mutual funds, they're kind of bond funds. They're doing about 3%. We got some better ones. They'll get you about 5%. The 401k, that's got a good contribution limit, lets you reduce your income. Go ahead and keep doing that. And then when you retire, come roll it over here. We'll get you some break points because you'll have more money under management with us. Keep that up. And insurance, not really what we do, but it seems like a good idea. So why don't you just keep on going with that? But as what we've talked through today, what I see are a bunch of red flags here in the forms of money falling through the cracks and things being inefficient. And so we want to take a look at that. Now, if they've got $500,000 in their IRA today, they're 50, they're retiring at 65, and it's growing at 8%, do you see any problem that they're going to have?
Higher tax rate when they.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Just the growth on that will put it at $1.6 million. The RMDs on that are going to put them in one of the higher tax brackets in retirement. So what can we do about that?
Convert it.
We could do a Roth conversion. Okay, so let's consider that. So how to keep a Roth or an IRA from growing? Don't say put it in the market. Okay, we're going to do a conversion. So Roth conversion's an idea. Now, if they did that though, how old are they?
50.
Okay. What happens if you pull money from an IRA before age 59 and a half?
Penalty.
And tax.
Yeah.
Penalty and tax. Now, you can do the Roth conversion, but you got to pay tax at current rates. And if they did that all in one fell swoop, that's going to put them in a really high bracket. And there's that penalty that we didn't include. It's going to be a huge hit. I would probably not ever suggest doing this that way, because you're dropping $200,000 plus out of it in one fell swoop. That doesn't seem prudent. But there is a little tax code, Section 72, subsection T. And so in our industry, when we do something like this, we call it a 72T because we're so creative, right? And it says that we can take equal annual distributions from our IRA before age 59 and a half. We have to pay tax, but we don't get subject to that 10% penalty. They have to last for at least 5 years or until 59 and a half, whichever's longer. Well, in these folks' case, it's longer, right? So that means we can take about 5% of their IRA and do a Roth conversion each year without having a penalty. But we have to pay the tax as we go, okay? So that's one thing we can do with the IRA. So we'll have about $25,000 coming out of there a year to get into the tax-free bucket. We're trying in all cases to put more in the tax-free bucket. So if they've been contributing to their mutual funds at about $6,000 a year, we can take those dollars and add that to the pot. If there's no match at the employer's 401k offering, is there really any good incentive to keep participating there? They're clunky, they're hard to really manage what you're investing in. If there's not the match, there's not the incentive. So we can take those dollars and use them as well. We like life insurance where there's a need and long-term care where there's a need, but we also know that there's some more efficient ways that we can look at it. So we want to just throw these dollars in the pot and see how it works. So altogether, we've got about $47,000 that we can shift to their tax-free bucket per year without causing them any grief, right? I hear a no. Do we have a candy bar? Who said that? So you're correct. We don't. Why? Because we have increased their current tax burden by pulling from the IRA and not contributing to the 401k, right? Now, one thing I've learned, if we cut back on lifestyle, sometimes the missus is not that happy with us. So we want to make sure that we're okay. We don't want to live on top ramen and stuff anymore. So if they're in the 30% cumulative tax rate, we have to take $10,500 away from that for the taxes because of those changes. But there's still $36,500 to put into the tax-free bucket. Now, one of my favorite tools to use is a Roth IRA as we do that. Now, after age 50, each of them can contribute $8,000 into that Roth IRA each year, right? Because their income's below the threshold and everything. And if they leave it there, everything they take out of that after age 59 and a half is tax-free, doesn't affect Social Security. It's just smooth sailing. Yes?
That's with the tax code as it currently stands.
Mm-hmm.
So when they bust the $53 trillion limit, is there anything that would prevent Congress from enacting legislation and taxation on the Roth IRA?
No, I mean, Congress is in session, they can do what they will. And I get this question frequently. Here's my take, and here's what I hear from people much smarter than I. If you look at the resources available, so let's make you the Comptroller General of the U.S., and you're making recommendations to Congress based on stuff that you think will work. And you say, okay, we got this big population of retirees out there, and they've got all of this tax-deferred money. We're just waiting for them to take it out. And it's already earmarked and taxable and legal to find. And then we have this smaller pot of Roth money, and the only thing we have a shot at taxing is the growth on it, because they've already taxed the dollars going in. Which are you going to focus your energy on? You're going to focus on the big pie. The probability of them going after that is so small, it's not funny. Now, in the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0, in both cases, they attempted to close what they called backdoor Roth loopholes to keep high net worth, high income earners. So high income earners can overfund their 401k and they don't get the deduction because it's beyond the limit, right? So it's after tax, so it's becoming a Roth by default. So they attempted to close that, they didn't even do that.
Oh, they were gonna close because that's what I do.
Overfund.
I put up to the limit into the 401k, and then beyond that, because I fund myself at 20%, then beyond that limit.
It's after
I put
tax.
into, yeah, the Roth IRA.
Yeah. So I just don't see it. It's not a big enough target. They're bigger, easier places to get it. I don't see it. And because they've done what they've done for so long, I mean, the Roth came into effect in the 90s. And so what happens typically when they do legislative changes, they grandfather people that are already there. So I don't see it. All right, so we got 16,000 going in a Roth. There's still 20,500 that we want to get into this tax-free bucket. How can we do that? We've maxed out our Roth. There's not a Roth 401k option for this scenario. Well, what if I told you there was a place that we could put money into that would grow tax deferred? There's no penalty for taking it out before 59 and a half. There's no 1099s on the growth. There's tax-free distributions. There's no contribution limits. There's no income thresholds. And no legislative risk. We were talking about that a second ago. You can use this as a Roth-like vehicle, and it's been done for decades, centuries. Any interested takers?
Too good to be true.
No, everybody says that.
It's a money tree, right?
No, it's actually, remember I told you if you structure certain permanent life insurance contracts properly, they could be worked like a Roth. So the catch is, there's always a price. The catch is there's going to be some expense in there for life insurance. Now the IRS has known about this for a long time. In the 1970s, this became kind of a big deal for regulators to crack down on mobsters because they were putting a lot of money through here. And so they put some things in place, but it still makes for a great tool. Now the IRS gets to say how much, depending on how much money you want to stuff in, they will tell you what the minimum death benefit has to be for what you're funding, okay? And they have tests for that. And so you're paying for some term insurance out of it, but you get with it in the bonus a long-term care benefit. And so like we talked before, let's say that the IRS for what you're wanting to stuff in there, that $20,600, It says you have to have a $400,000 death benefit. My wife has $500,000 on hers. So that says then if she needs help for activities of daily living, that we have access to 25% of that death benefit while she's alive, tax-free. So kind of an extra bonus there. So we've replaced the term insurance and the long-term care insurance. We like to call this product a LIRP, a life insurance retirement plan, mostly because I think it's fun to say. But it's being used and taught actually actively in a lot of financial schools as a way to work through this. So if you're talking about a perfect tax bracket to have in retirement, what is it?
Zero.
Zero. But that's not on the chart. Okay? So how did we do with these guys? Did we get to zero? So if we look at what we have, we've got their Roth IRA that we funded at $8,000 apiece over time, no tax. We've got their LIRPs. We structured them properly. They can take income from their tax-free also. If we then look at the IRA that we helped stay at $500,000 via the 72T, the standard deduction does adjust for inflation over time. We expect that to continue. So 15 years hence, that's probably somewhere in the $45,000 range. And so if we take the RMD from there, we've got that much we can take without causing a tax issue. So the IRA, we're getting out tax-free. We got a deduction. It grew tax deferred. We're taking out tax-free. So we got the trifecta. And the LIRP and the IRA. Social Security is not affected because none of those other things go into the provisional income equation. Voila. Okay? It can be done. Unless you have a pension, then we have to work harder and do other things. Now, if you're not in the 0% tax bracket, what's second best? 10. And if you add state tax to that, depending on where you live, in Idaho it's 6, Utah it's 5. You're at 16. And if rates double, as they're saying they have to, second place from 0 is suddenly 32%. Kind of makes a big difference on your cash flow in retirement if we don't hit that mark. So if we look at this couple on the trajectory they would have been on, our software said they'd run out of money around age 85. Doing what we did, same dollars, we didn't have them make more or sacrifice lifestyle. They last to age 100 and have $1.5 million almost left over still. Which would you rather have? Just saying. So the most common questions we get about now is, have I waited too long? Am I too old for this? And no, I will refer you in sense of time to Prime, Amazon Prime. You can find this. It's called
The truth is the federal government
Power of
has
Zero.
lost control of the budget.
Instead
Tax
of
train's
paying
coming.
for all the new initiatives, whether they're tax
about an
cuts,
hour-long movie.
spending increases, all sorts of things that we like, the government's just putting it all on the national credit card. And as a result, our national debt is just going up and up and up. And it's growing faster than the economy, and that's when you know you have a real problem.
Everything is going to be squeezed out of the budget. There won't be anything left.
The road we are on is a perilous one that ultimately leads to the bankrupting of our country.
So we have a crisis on our hands.
All Congress has to do for this whole situation to come to a head is nothing. Because every year that they do nothing makes the problem even more unsolvable.
We don't seem to have the ability to get along and find common ground.
Obviously, it's a little dated.
Trying to trick you right now? And the answer is very simply yes.
So why is this being swept under the rug? Why is nobody talking about this?
Probably because it's not popular.
So I've actually been traveling around the country for about 4 years now, taking the Power of Zero message to different groups.
When you cut taxes on current generations, you are simultaneously raising them on future generations.
It is all driven by spending. Once we have spent a dollar, we've already decided to tax it. The only question is whether we tax it now or we borrow it now and tax it in the future.
So to make up for the liabilities that we're incurring with all the promises we've made in social insurance programs, we're going to have to increase substantially the tax rate and perhaps even double it.
Now, precisely how high it's going to be, there's a lot of room to debate, but people will have to pay more taxes.
People's retirement savings are at risk of future higher taxes.
Well, qualified plans really do two things. They defer the tax and the tax calculation. Now let that run past your brain real slow.
I'm driven by trying to help as many people as I can avoid this disaster that's going to come up in retirement when taxes go up and the market goes down. What are these people going to do if they haven't planned ahead of time?
Years with what we know, and the pundits are suggesting they're probably going to kick the can down the road another 4 years beyond that. So I think we have several more years in which to make good, solid moves. Next question that comes up is, can I be in the zero tax bracket and still be a good citizen? Well, first I have to point out to you that in doing what we're suggesting, we would be paying taxes. We're just paying them now while they're lower. Okay, so we're not avoiding taxes. That's illegal. We're just doing it in the most intelligent way for us. There's a quote out there that I invite you to look up. I think it may be in the book, by Judge Learned Hand, arguably the most quoted judge not appointed to the Supreme Court. And he said that any man may so arrange his affairs as to minimize his tax liability. He owes no duty to the Treasury to do what's best for the Treasury. So we're just trying to do what we can to get ourselves off the train track. How come you've never heard of this before? Maybe you have. But there's a couple reasons, either one of which bother me. The first would be whoever your advisor is hasn't had the kind of training, and so that would cause pause. The other is a little more nefarious. So if you look at a typical advisory arrangement, they're going to be getting a percentage of the assets under management or some form of compensation there. And so if you've got $1 million with them and they're getting a percent, say, they're making $10,000 a year. If they help you to shift that to be better for you, but cost 30% in tax in doing that in the process, they've cut their pay by 30%, so there's a conflict of interest in that arrangement. Not necessarily. Not all financial professionals carry a fiduciary duty. I do as an investment advisor. My license requires me to be a fiduciary. Ask. And if you get a cavalier answer from Edward Jones, as someone shared with us, oh, we all are. No, you're not. What license do you carry? It's a Series 65 securities license that you're looking for. Series 65. Yeah, it falls under the... So in our broken system, we don't have time for this because we're out of time. There are two sets of regulations that regulate investing. And then another 50, however, for insurance. Each state has its own set of insurance stuff, its own insurance commission. Most brokers operate under the Securities Exchange Act of 1933, okay? And it just tells them some of the things they need to do. They need to do things that are generally considered suitable for their investor. But there's not a fiduciary duty. The Investment Advisory Act of 1940 created the fiduciary, and that's the license that I'm working under. So we're fiduciaries. And we get audited, and it's fun. But it's good. It's a good thing. I think that you are owed that, but you need to find that. And unfortunately, there's just not a really great way. But the first way is to see, are you working as an investment advisor, not a broker? If they're working for a broker, it's not a fiduciary. And if it's insurance only, and they don't have a securities license at all, they're not a fiduciary either. All right, so takeaways. The only way to truly insulate yourself from higher tax rates is to get to the 0% tax bracket or as close as you can. It's nearly impossible to get there relying on just single streams of income and not look at whatever products are available and tools to get the job done. Taxes went on sale on January 1st, 2018 when the Trump tax cuts went into effect, and they went into effect with an expiration date of January 1st, 2026. So we're on the clock. All of that's good news because you still have time to do something. And so take advantage of the complementary strategy session if you'd like. We'll just superimpose these concepts on your numbers, see if there's something falling through the cracks. But I'm sure if, like, you went to the ATM machine and got out a bunch of cash, set it on your front seat, but your back windows were down and dollars were sucking out, you'd want someone to tell you, right? So if we can help you notice that and show you some things that make a difference. What we do as a process of that, strategy sessions usually go 60 to 90 minutes depending on your questions. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with. Obviously, you have to have a certain degree of information, but we can do that with round numbers. You know, this is kind of how it looks. If you want to do more, great. When we're through with that, we will prepare for you 3 scenarios. The first will look like we never met, you never heard of any of this before, and life just went on just like it's been. What does it look like? Does it look like you might run out of money, or you look good? How's it feel? This is what the numbers say. We'll plug in taxes and inflation as they are now. We'll do a second scenario and stress test that and say, what if tax rates doubled? What would that do? How does it look? And then the third scenario would be, what if we implemented some of these changes? What difference would it make? And if it doesn't make much, then, why stress? But if it made $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million difference over the next 35 years of your life and on to your heirs, is that worth considering? So we'll leave it to you to see. You've seen how mean I am. So Elise is in the back. She'll be happy to get you on the calendar. If you do schedule an appointment, I think she's got some books back there from David McKnight that wrote the book, The Power of Zero, on which that movie is based, for more light reading at home. But give yourselves a round of applause for taking time out of a Saturday. Try to make your retirement better. We wish you nothing but the best of success in your retirement. We hope it's all it can be for you.